"Too big, just sit on it," the rich rancher whispered to the young giant widow who was terrified. The sun rose slowly over the small, quiet town, painting the wooden fences and the fields of the ranch with a soft, golden glow. In the distance, the hills were alive with the gentle hum of morning life. Birds sang as they darted between the trees, and the cool morning air carried the faint smell of dew and wildflowers. It was a peaceful place, a town where everyone knew each other, and life moved slowly, almost like the clouds that floated lazily across the sky. But for one young woman, this calm world felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. Her name was Lila, and she was different from everyone else. Not just a little different. She was tall and strong, taller than almost everyone in the town. Her arms were long and powerful, and even her hands looked larger than what people were used to. People often stared at her when she walked down the street, some with curiosity, some with fear, and some with quiet admiration. Lila had always felt the weight of those eyes on her, a pressure that made her wish she could shrink into the shadows and disappear. She tried to walk quietly, to speak softly, and to stay invisible, but the world seemed determined to remind her that she did not fit into it. Lila's life had changed suddenly and forever. Her husband, a kind man who had always treated her like an equal, had died unexpectedly just a few months ago. The grief was still fresh, raw like an open wound. Before his death, Lila had felt strong but untested. Now with him gone, she felt like her own strength had turned into a burden. Every small task reminded her of what she had lost. She would see the empty chair at the kitchen table and feel a pang in her chest. She would hear the laughter of other couples in town and feel a sharp twist of loneliness. Most of all, she felt fear. Fear of herself, her strength, and the life that now seemed too heavy to carry. The townspeople tried to help in their own way, but even their kindness could feel like a reminder of her difference. Children would stare a little too long, pointing at her arms and legs that seemed to stretch on forever. Some adults would whisper when they thought she couldn't hear, wondering if she was too strong, too big, or too unusual for their quiet little town. Even simple things like sitting in a chair or carrying groceries felt like a challenge because she had always been careful not to break things, not to stand out, not to make people uncomfortable. Lila felt trapped in her own body, her own strength, and her own sorrow. She spent most of her days wandering the empty fields that surrounded the town. The grass would brush against her legs, and the wind would play with her hair, but even the open sky couldn't make her feel free. She would imagine what it would be like to live somewhere no one knew her, somewhere she could be just herself without fear or judgment. But deep down she knew running away wouldn't solve anything. She needed to find a way to live with her strength, her grief, and the world that didn't quite know what to do with her. It was on one of these walks, early in the morning when the world was still half asleep, that she first noticed the rancher. He was a man of quiet power, with broad shoulders and a calm presence that seemed to make people feel safe. He owned one of the largest ranches in the area, a sprawling land filled with animals, fields, and rolling hills. People said he was rich, but he was not flashy. He did not chase attention or gossip. Instead, he moved like someone who understood the rhythm of life, someone who knew how to work with the land and the people who lived near it. Lila saw him from a distance, tending to a young horse that seemed skittish and frightened. The rancher moved slowly and gently, his voice soft but firm, coaxing the animal with patience. Lila was drawn to the scene. There was something about the way he worked, calm, steady, and confident, that felt different from the rest of the town. He was not afraid of strength or size, either in himself or in others. Somehow just watching him made Lila feel a little less like she had to hide. Over the next few days, she found herself walking past the ranch more often, pretending it was by accident. She watched him care for his animals, repair fences, and work in the fields. There was no hurry in his movements, no sense of judgment, only purpose and attention to the task at hand. Lila realized she had been craving this kind of acceptance, not the kind people offered out of pity, but the kind that made her feel seen without pressure.
Yet, even with this curiosity, fear held her back.
Dispatched amongst me. What if she went there and made a mistake? What if she could not control herself? What if her presence caused more harm than good? One afternoon, as she sat on the edge of the road watching the rancher finally noticed her. He did not stare or whisper. He simply approached with a calm, friendly smile. "Hello," he said. His voice was warm, carrying a weight that made it feel safe to reply. "You've been walking past my ranch a lot. Are you thinking about working with me?" His question was simple, but it sent a jolt of surprise through Lila. She had not expected anyone to notice, let alone speak to her directly, without judgment or fear. I don't know," she admitted, her voice small. "I'm not sure if I could." She looked down at her hands, her mind racing with doubts and fears. "I'm different," she said finally, the words catching in her throat. "People, they stare. I'm too big, too strong. I don't want to break anything." The rancher nodded slowly, as if he had expected her answer but also wanted her to understand something important. "Strength isn't a flaw," he said quietly. "It's a gift. You don't have to hide it, and you don't have to be afraid. Sometimes the world just hasn't learned how to see people like you." His words were gentle, yet they struck something deep inside her. For the first time in months, Lila felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was a place where her size, her strength, and even her grief could be accepted, not judged. He went on to explain how he ran his ranch, emphasizing teamwork, patience, and trust. "I think you could help here," he said. "Not because you're strong, but because you're capable. And maybe in the process, you'll discover something about yourself too." His words felt like an invitation not just to work but to step into a life that could be hers, a life that might feel bigger and better than the one she had known so far. Lila spent the rest of that day thinking about him and the ranch. She imagined herself moving through the fields, caring for animals, and learning to trust her own strength. The fear did not vanish, but it softened, replaced by curiosity and a flicker of courage. She realized that hiding from the world had only made her feel smaller and weaker, while stepping forward, even a little, might be the first step toward reclaiming her life. By evening, she returned to the empty fields near her home. The wind stirred the grass around her, and the sky above turned shades of pink and orange. Lila lifted her head and looked out over the horizon. For the first time in a long while, she felt the possibility of something new, something real and hopeful, waiting for her. Maybe she was ready to stop hiding. Maybe she could learn to be herself, without fear, without shame, and without holding back. And though she did not know exactly what the future would bring, she felt the tiniest, most fragile thread of hope begin to grow. It was the hope that she could find a place where her strength was not a burden, where her grief could be honored, and where she could finally belong. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Lila took her first real breath in months, a breath that carried with it not just sorrow, but the beginning of courage, the kind that changes a life forever. The next morning, Lila woke up with a strange mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to stay hidden, safe in her small, quiet home, surrounded by familiar walls that had never judged her. But another part of her, a part she had almost forgotten existed, felt curious. The rancher's words from yesterday echoed in her mind. Strength isn't a flaw. You don't have to hide it, and you don't have to be afraid. Desp. For the first time in many months, Lila considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could belong somewhere again. She dressed slowly, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. Even the simple act of putting on her coat felt heavy with thought. What if she went to the ranch and made a mistake? What if she accidentally broke something or frightened someone? What if she wasn't really as capable as the rancher had said? Her mind raced with doubts, but her heart also nudged her forward. This was her chance to try, to step into a life that could be hers, even if it was frightening. When she finally reached the edge of the ranch, she paused and took a deep breath. The morning sun shimmered on the fields, and the sound of horses neighing in the distance carried across the air. The rancher was already there, checking the fence lines and tending to a small group of cows. He noticed her immediately, but did not make her feel rushed. Instead, he gave her a small nod, a silent invitation to approach. Lila swallowed hard and walked forward, feeling the weight of her fear with every step. "Good morning, Lila," he said, his voice calm and warm. "Are you ready to see if the ranch is a place for you?" She hesitated, looking down at her hands. I think so," she said, her voice quiet, almost like a whisper. "But I'm scared. I don't want to make a mistake." The rancher smiled gently. "Everyone is scared at first, even me. It's normal to feel afraid when you're trying something new. The important thing is to try anyway." His words were simple, but they carried a strength that made Lila feel slightly braver. Slowly, she followed him as he showed her around the ranch. There were horses with soft eyes that seemed to watch her carefully, cows grazing quietly in the fields, and chickens pecking around near the barn. Everything felt alive, yet nothing felt threatening. For the first time in months, Lila felt a small sense of peace. Not complete comfort, but the beginnings of it. The rancher handed her a broom first. "Cleaning the barn is simple but important. You can start here," he said. "Just take your time. Don't worry about doing it perfectly. The barn needs care, not perfection." Lila nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. She had always been careful with her strength, and even sweeping the barn required her to adjust how she moved. She feared breaking the wooden walls or knocking over a bucket, but as she worked, something surprising happened. The rhythm of the broom on the floor, the smell of hay, and the sound of animals around her began to quiet her thoughts. She was still afraid, yes, but she was also discovering something else. A small, unexpected confidence that her body could be trusted if she paid attention. The rancher watched from a short distance, occasionally offering gentle advice. "Slow and steady," he said once. "Let the broom guide you. Let your strength help, not hurry you." Lila tried to focus on his words. She realized she had spent so long hiding her strength, trying to make herself small, that she had forgotten it could also be helpful. Slowly, carefully, she began to feel a little more capable. The barn wasn't just a place to clean. It was a place where her presence mattered. For the first time, she didn't feel like a burden. But as the day went on, Lila's fears began to return. It wasn't easy to step into a new life. Carrying hay bales, opening gates, and even just walking across the fields made her anxious. Desk. Every time she dropped something or made a loud noise, she flinched, worried she had done something wrong. She noticed the other ranch workers glancing at her, some with curiosity, some with cautious respect, and it reminded her that she still stood out. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion settled into her muscles, but her mind was even busier. She worried she was not cut out for ranch life. Maybe the rancher had been too kind in believing she could do it. Maybe she really was too big, too strong, too unusual for this world. Pressed in, heavy and relentless, and for a moment, Lila wondered if she should turn back, return to her quiet home, and pretend yesterday had never happened. Just as these thoughts threatened to overwhelm her, the rancher approached with a calm smile. "Lila," he said, I know it's hard. I know it feels like the world is too much sometimes. But don't let fear tell you who you are. Fear is loud, but it doesn't control you. You do. She looked at him, unsure if she could believe him. But what if I fail? She whispered. What if I can't do this? He shook his head gently. You won't fail because you are trying. That's the only failure that matters. Ben. And remember, strength isn't just about muscles or size. Strength is courage. It's persistence. It's heart. You have all of that. His words made something click inside her. Lila realized that she had been thinking too much about what she couldn't do, rather than what she could. She had been so focused on fear that she forgot the very thing that had always been part of her. Her heart, her courage, her willingness to try, even when the world seemed to doubt her. By the evening, Lila was tired but proud. She had carried hay, cleaned the barn, and even helped guide a young foal into the stable. She had not been perfect. There were bumps, loud noises, and moments of clumsiness. But she had not broken anything important either. More than that, she had survived the day without hiding, without running, without giving in to the fear that had haunted her for months. As she walked home through the fields, the sun dipping behind the hills, Lila felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her muscles ached, but her heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. She realized something important. Strength was not something to fear. It was part of her, yes, but it was also a tool, a gift, and maybe even a key to her future. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the rancher's words and the day's work. Free. She thought about the barn, the animals, and the fields she had walked through. For the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. She felt seen, even in her fear. She felt capable, even in her uncertainty. And she felt, most importantly, that she had a choice. She could let fear control her, or she could choose to step forward, one small step at a time. The next morning she returned to the ranch with a quiet determination. Each day was still a challenge, and fear was still present, but it no longer ruled her. Slowly, carefully, she began to learn not just the tasks of ranch life, but the lessons of courage and trust. She began to see that the ranch could be a place where she belonged, a place where her strength was respected, her differences accepted, and her heart understood. Little by little, Lila discovered that the world could be bigger than her fears, that life could hold space for her, and that she didn't have to hide to be safe. With each passing day, the young widow who had once been terrified of her own strength began to feel something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Hope that she could live. Hope that she could belong. Hope that she could grow into the person she was always meant to be. The days at the ranch began to flow together, each one teaching Lila something new. She was no longer the timid, frightened widow who had wandered the fields, unsure of where she belonged. Browse. She had started to understand that her strength, which had once terrified her, could also be a tool, a way to help rather than harm. Still, there were moments when fear crept back in, uninvited, reminding her of all the times she had been told she was different, too big, too strong, too unusual. One morning, the rancher asked her to help with a new task, moving a group of young cattle from one pasture to another. It was not dangerous work, but it required focus, patience, and steady hands. Lila's first reaction was hesitation. She remembered how heavy and unpredictable the animals could be, and she was terrified of accidentally harming one. The thought made her stomach twist. For a long moment she considered refusing, thinking she might be better off staying on simpler, safer tasks. But the rancher looked at her calmly. "Lila, I know you're afraid. That's natural, but fear doesn't mean you can't do this. It only means you need to pay attention, trust yourself, and go slowly. You're stronger than you think. Not just physically, but in your heart and mind." His words resonated deep inside her. She realized that fear had always been a part of her life, a shadow that had followed her since childhood. It was nothing new, but it didn't have to control her. She could face it, one step at a time, and she could still succeed. Lila nodded quietly and followed him into the pasture. The young cattle were restless, their small hooves kicking up dirt as they shifted nervously from side to side. They were unfamiliar with her, just as she was unfamiliar with this particular work. Her first attempt to guide them resulted in them scattering in different directions, and she froze, panic rising in her chest. She felt the old familiar fear, the one that had held her back for months. Her hands shook slightly, and she felt like running away. The rancher's voice broke through her panic. "Breathe, Lila. Slow down. Don't try to control them all at once. Focus on one at a time." Dance. "You can do this." She took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling her lungs, and looked around. Instead of thinking about all the animals at once, she focused on a single calf nearest to her. She moved carefully, speaking softly, letting the calf hear her voice before reaching out. Slowly, it began to follow her direction. Moving toward the fence she needed it to cross. Encouraged, she focused on the next calf, then the next, step by step. Hours passed in this careful rhythm, but something remarkable happened. With every calf she guided, Lila began to feel a strange sense of accomplishment. Her hands, which had once seemed too large and clumsy, moved with precision and care. Her arms, which had felt heavy and awkward, became instruments of purpose and control. The fear was still there, yes, but it no longer dominated her. Instead, it became a guide, telling her where she needed to focus, helping her to pay attention and act deliberately. By midday, the last calf had safely crossed into the new pasture. Lila stood in the sun, her clothes dusty, her muscles aching, but her heart swelling with pride. She had done it. She had faced a challenge that had seemed impossible, and she had succeeded. For the first time, she didn't feel like a danger to herself or others. She felt capable. She felt alive. The rancher approached her, his face calm but his eyes bright with encouragement. "You see, Lila?" he said softly. "Strength isn't just about what you can lift or how tall you are. Strength is how you handle fear. Strength is courage. Today, you showed both." Lila felt a lump in her throat. She had spent so long hiding, doubting herself, and trying to make herself small that she had forgotten what it felt like to be proud of herself. She realized that her strength, once a source of fear, could now be a source of confidence. She had begun to trust herself in a way she never had before. As the days passed, she took on more responsibilities at the ranch. She helped mend fences, carry water to the fields, and assist with the horses. Each task presented new challenges, but each one also gave her a chance to practice control and patience. Sometimes things went wrong. A fence would break, a horse would bolt, or a bucket of water would spill. But with every mistake, the rancher's voice reminded her, "It's okay. You are learning. You are growing." Breath without control is nothing. Control without courage is nothing. Together, they make you who you are. One afternoon, the rancher asked her to help with a particularly large task, moving a heavy gate that had fallen and was blocking the main pathway. Lila felt a flicker of fear. The gate was enormous, and she wasn't sure if she could lift it or guide it safely. For a moment, she wanted to say no, to walk away and pretend she hadn't seen it. But something inside her had changed. She remembered the young calves, the hours of careful work, and the sense of pride she had felt. She took a deep breath and nodded. Together, she and the rancher lifted the gate, moving slowly and carefully. Her muscles strained, her palms burned, and sweat dripped down her forehead. But step by step they shifted the gate into place, clearing the path. When it was finally secured, Lila stepped back and looked at their work. Her heart raced, but this time with exhilaration instead of fear. She had done it. She had used her strength wisely, controlled her fear, and succeeded. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Lila sat on the porch of the ranch house. She watched the fields, the animals, and the quiet town beyond, and she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She realized that her fear, while still present, no longer defined her. She had faced it head-on and discovered that her strength was not a curse, but a gift, one she could use to help herself and others. But the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond grief and isolation. She imagined herself walking confidently through the fields, helping the animals, and contributing to the ranch. She imagined a life where her differences were no longer a source of shame, but a source of pride. The thought made her chest swell with warmth and determination. It wasn't an easy journey. Every day brought new challenges, new fears, and new lessons. But Lila began to understand that life was not about being perfect. It was about showing up, trying, and trusting herself. She had learned that strength was not something to fear, but something to embrace. And more importantly, she had learned that courage and heart could transform fear into power. The turning point had come quietly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a sudden revelation or a dramatic event. It was a series of small choices, deciding to show up, to focus on one task at a time, to trust her own hands and heart. These small moments, when added together, had changed her. They had taught her that she could face the world without hiding, that she could stand tall even when the ground felt uncertain, and that her life, though different, could be full and meaningful. That night, Lila went to bed with a sense of peace she had not known in a long time. She thought about the rancher, the fields, the animals, and the small victories of the day. She realized that she had been holding herself back for so long, trying to fit into a world that had never been ready for her. But now, she understood that she didn't need to fit in. She just needed to trust herself, step forward, and allow her strength to guide her. As she drifted off to sleep, she imagined the coming days. More work at the ranch, more challenges, more lessons. She imagined herself growing stronger, not just in body but in mind and spirit. And for the first time she felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that fear was no longer a wall, but a doorway. A doorway she was willing to step through, one careful, courageous step at a time. The morning air was thick with the scent of rain. Dark clouds hung low over the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch. The animals were restless, sensing the approaching storm. Lila stood near the barn, her heart beating faster than usual. Today felt different. There was tension in the air that made her muscles tighten and her mind race. The rancher had been watching the sky all morning, checking fences and making sure everything was secure. But Lila could see the worry in his eyes. This was no ordinary day. "You've been learning well, Lila," he said softly, walking beside her. But today you might have to put everything you've learned into practice. Are you ready?
Lila nodded, though her throat felt tight.
She was ready in one way, but fear lingered like a shadow at the edge of her thoughts. The storm was coming, and with it came challenges she had never faced before. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was the moment where courage would matter more than strength. The first warning came with the wind. It started slow, teasing the tall grasses and swaying the trees. But soon it grew louder, stronger, whipping around the ranch with sudden intensity. The animals sensed the danger immediately. The horses in the pastures neighed and pawed at the ground, and the cows huddled together, anxious and confused. Lila felt her pulse quicken. She had helped with many tasks before, but never under such pressure. She realized that today she would have to act not just with skill, but with calm and leadership. "Stay calm," the rancher called over the roar of the wind. "We'll handle this together. Focus on the animals first. Keep them safe." Lila nodded again, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She began with the horses. One of them, a large gray stallion, was particularly panicked. It tossed its head and whinnied, trying to break free from the fence. Lila approached slowly, speaking softly. She remembered the lessons she had learned: patience, focus, control, courage. She did not try to force the horse. Instead, she moved alongside it, letting it feel her presence without fear. Her hands, steady despite the wind, guided the animal gently toward the barn. It was exhausting work, but Lila felt a surge of determination. She was not just controlling animals. She was controlling herself. Every step she took, every decision she made, required both physical and mental strength. And for the first time, she realized that her fears were no longer walls, but tools. They helped her pay attention, act carefully, and protect those who relied on her. The storm intensified, rain lashing the ground and turning the dirt into thick mud. Lila could hear the wind tearing at the roofs of the barns and rattling the gates. The other workers were struggling too, some shouting for help, some trying to hold fences in place. Lila's heart pounded, but she did not panic. She focused on one task at a time, one animal at a time. She moved with purpose, guiding the livestock to safety, securing gates, and helping her fellow workers. Each action required strength, courage, and clarity. At one point, a large calf broke free and ran toward the edge of the cliff near the back of the ranch. Lila's heart skipped a beat. The ground was slippery, the wind howling, and one wrong step could send both her and the calf tumbling. Without hesitation, she ran, calling softly to the animal. Her long legs carried her across the mud and rocks with surprising speed. She reached the calf just in time, wrapping her arms around it and guiding it back toward the safer pasture. Her hands shook with the effort, her clothes soaked, but she had succeeded. The rancher watched from a distance, pride shining in his eyes. "Well done, Lila," he shouted over the storm. "You're doing exactly what needs to be done." "Keep going." The storm raged on for hours, testing Lila in ways she had never imagined. Every corner of the ranch required her attention. The animals, the fences, the gates, and even the small buildings that risked damage. She moved tirelessly, using her strength to lift, pull, and push where needed. But more importantly, she used her mind to think, plan, and stay calm. She had learned that strength without control could be dangerous, but now she saw how control without courage was just as limiting. Only together did they make her capable of facing this storm. By late afternoon, the worst of the storm had passed, leaving behind a wet, muddy, but safe ranch. Lila stood at the top of the hill, looking out over the fields. Every animal was accounted for, every fence repaired or secured, every gate in place. Her muscles ached, Her clothes clung to her from the rain, and her face was streaked with mud and sweat. But her heart was soaring. She had faced fear, chaos, and the unknown, and she had triumphed. The rancher approached her, his own clothes soaked but his eyes shining with pride. "Lila," he said, "today you've done more than just help with the ranch. You've shown courage, control, and heart. That storm could have been overwhelming, but you turned it into a challenge you conquered. That is real strength." Lila felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had spent so long thinking of her strength as something dangerous, something to hide or fear, but today she had used it to protect, to save, to lead. She realized that her body, her mind, and her heart were all capable of extraordinary things when she trusted them. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting light across the wet fields, Lila finally allowed herself to breathe fully. The adrenaline of the storm slowly faded, replaced by a deep, satisfying sense of accomplishment. She looked at the rancher, who nodded silently in understanding, and felt a profound sense of belonging. For the first time, she understood that her life did not have to be ruled by fear or grief. She had power, yes, but more importantly, she had courage, purpose, and hope. That night, the ranch was quiet again. The animals settled into their stalls, the workers cleaned up, and Lila sat by the porch, exhausted but filled with a new sense of strength. She thought about the storm, about how close danger had come, and about how she had risen to meet it. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And in that realization, she found peace. The storm had tested her, but it had also transformed her. Lila no longer felt small or out of place. Desperate, she no longer doubted herself at every turn. She had discovered a side of herself she had never known, a combination of strength, focus, and courage that could face any challenge. And she knew that this was only the beginning. The ranch, the animals, the work, and the people who trusted her, all of it was now part of a life she could step into fully, without hiding or fear. As she looked out over the fields, the moon rising over the hills, Lila felt a quiet but powerful certainty. She could handle what came next. She could face the storms of life, literal or metaphorical, with strength and heart. She had passed her first great test, and she had passed it not because she was fearless, but because she had trusted herself and her abilities. And in that moment, for the first time in months, Lila smiled freely, without hesitation or doubt. She had found not just safety or purpose, but a place where she belonged, a place where her strength, courage, and heart could flourish. The storm had passed, but the transformation it brought was permanent. The morning after the storm, the ranch looked different, though not damaged beyond repair. The fields were wet and muddy, but the animals were safe. The sky was bright, a clear blue stretching endlessly over the hills. Sunlight glimmered off the wet grass and puddles, creating tiny reflections that sparkled like a million tiny stars. Lila stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the world wake up. Everything felt alive and fresh, as if the storm had not only passed but had also washed away old doubts and fears. She remembered the terror she had felt just the day before, the way her heart had raced as the wind tore through the fields, threatening the animals she had come to care for. She remembered her hands shaking, her muscles straining, her mind screaming at her to run and hide. And yet, she had faced it. She had acted with care, courage, and control. She had used her strength not to dominate or harm, but to protect and guide. The realization filled her with a quiet, steady pride. The rancher approached quietly, carrying a bucket of water for the horses. "Morning, Lila," he said, smiling as he handed her the bucket. "How do you feel?" Lila took it from him and felt the cool weight in her hands. She smiled back, a real, confident smile. "I feel different," she said simply. "I feel stronger, but not just in my arms. Strong inside, too." The rancher nodded. "That's what happens when you face fear instead of letting it control you. Strength isn't only about size or muscles. It's about courage, heart, and determination. Today you proved that." Lila walked toward the barn, her boots squishing in the mud. The animals were calm, grazing peacefully in the fields, unaware of the storm that had passed through. The horses nickered softly as she approached, and she ran her hands along their backs, feeling their warmth and trust. She realized that these creatures, once strangers, now accepted her presence. They responded to her strength, her patience, and her care. And in turn, she felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. The other ranch workers had begun their tasks, repairing fences and cleaning up debris. They nodded to her as she passed, offering quiet smiles of acknowledgement. No one whispered or stared with suspicion. For the first time, Lila realized that people could respect her for who she was, not just tolerate her differences. That thought made her chest swell with hope. She belonged here. She truly did. As the day went on, Lila worked with a calm confidence she had never felt before. She mended fences with careful precision, fed the animals with gentle patience, and helped the younger workers when they needed guidance, reminded her of the lessons she had learned. Focus, patience, courage, and the wise use of her strength. She no longer feared making mistakes because she understood that mistakes were opportunities to learn, to grow, and to become stronger. The rancher watched her quietly throughout the day, impressed by her transformation. "Lila," he said at one point, "you've come a long way in a short time. Not many people could have faced what you did yesterday and handled it so well. But you did. And you'll only get better from here." Lila smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She realized she had spent so much of her life trying to hide from the world, trying to make herself small, trying to fit into spaces that weren't meant for her own despair. Afraid of how others might see her, and afraid of failing. But now she understood that her strength was not a problem to hide. It was a gift, something that could help her and others, something that made her unique and valuable. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the ranch, Lila walked to the edge of the field. The sky was painted in shades of pink and purple, reflecting off the puddles left by the storm. She felt the wind on her face and the soft earth under her boots. Everything felt right, peaceful, and alive. She thought about the journey she had been on, from the lonely widow who wandered the fields, afraid of her own body, to the confident woman who now moved with purpose and pride. Breaths. She remembered the rancher's gentle words. "Strength isn't a flaw. It's a gift. You don't have to hide it, and you don't have to be afraid." How true those words felt now. She had learned to trust herself, to face fear, to act with courage and care. She had discovered that being different was not something to hide, but something to embrace. Her life had meaning again, and she had a place where she belonged. That night, the ranch was quiet and calm. The animals rested peacefully in their stalls, and the workers had gone home. Lila sat on the porch, looking at the moon rising over the hills. She thought about the future, about the days and weeks ahead, and for the first time she felt truly excited. She could see herself growing stronger, learning more, and finding joy in the simple, meaningful work of the ranch. G realized that life was not about hiding or shrinking away from challenges. It was about facing them with courage, heart, and determination. The days turned into weeks, and Lila's confidence grew with each passing moment. She became an essential part of the ranch, respected by the workers and trusted by the rancher. She learned to handle even the most challenging tasks with grace and skill. Her strength, once feared, was now celebrated. She no longer avoided chairs, doors, or fields. She moved freely, confidently, and purposefully, but it wasn't just physical strength that had grown. Lila had learned emotional strength as well. She could face her grief without letting it control her. She could stand tall even in moments of fear, as she could trust herself to make the right decisions and handle whatever life threw at her. Her heart, which had felt broken and fragile, had healed in a way she never thought possible. One afternoon, the rancher called her over to a hill overlooking the ranch. "Lila," he said, "I want you to see something." They stood together, watching the fields stretch out, the animals grazing peacefully, and the fences standing strong. "This," he said, "is the result of your work, courage, and heart. You've changed this ranch, and you've changed yourself in the process." Lila felt tears fill her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of pride, of gratitude, and of joy. She realized that she had finally found a place where she could be herself, fully and unapologetically. She belonged here, not because she had hidden her differences, but because she had embraced them and used them to make a positive difference in the world around her. As the sun dipped below the hills, Lila stood tall, feeling the wind on her face and the earth beneath her feet. Pain. She had faced storms, both literal and metaphorical. She had discovered her own strength, courage, and heart. She had learned that being different was not a weakness, but a gift. And most importantly, she had found a place where she belonged, a place where she could live fully, confidently, and joyfully. From that day forward, Lila's life was no longer defined by fear or grief. She became a source of strength and inspiration to everyone around her. The townspeople who had once whispered and stared now watched her with respect and admiration. Children looked up to her with awe, seeing not just her height or strength, but her courage and kindness. And the rancher, who had believed in her from the beginning, watched her grow with quiet pride, knowing that she had finally found her place in the world. And so the young widow who had once been terrified of her own strength discovered that life, though full of challenges, could also be full of hope, courage, and belonging. She learned that true strength comes not from the body alone, but from the heart, mind, and soul. And in that discovery, Lila found the peace, confidence, and purpose she had been searching for all along. The ranch became her home in every sense of the word. It was a place of work, learning, growth, and care. It was a place where she could be herself without fear or judgment. And every day, as she walked through the fields, tended to the animals, and contributed to the ranch, she carried with her the knowledge that she was strong, capable, and enough, just as she was. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained. Lila had been tested, and she had emerged victorious, embraced her strength, and found her place in the world. And in the quiet beauty of the ranch, under the wide open sky, she finally felt at home, truly, completely, and forever.